This video is all about benchmarking, the process of assessing how your capabilities, your track record, and your achievements stack up to a position or award or grant you're applying for and to your equivalent peers. There are two primary benefits to regularly benchmarking yourself. The first is to help you write the most compelling applications for opportunities like jobs and awards throughout your career. And the second is to help identify areas where you would benefit most from some professional development. For the first reason, throughout your academic or research-related career, you will find yourself applying for all sorts of things. You might apply for a PhD position early in your career, or upon graduating from your PhD, you might apply for a postdoc position. Later on, you might apply for a tenure-track position in academia. Throughout all of these positions, you'll also probably be applying for things like grants and funding and fellowships, and on occasion applying or being nominated for prizes. And benchmarking yourself regularly and accurately can help you put forward the most compelling but representative proposals or applications in all of these tasks. Likewise, throughout your career, you will hopefully always be learning, always be bettering yourself. And one of the other benefits of benchmarking yourself is it can help reveal where you would benefit the most from some professional development or from learning new skills or from simply getting more experience. It's important to make a bit of a philosophical point early in the video. Some people will go through their careers with the philosophy that they should just do what they want to do and never ever compare themselves to others or necessarily against the criteria of some of the things that they're applying for. This is by all means a valid philosophy, but it needs to be said that many industries and sectors in academia are inherently very competitive. And a big part of that competition is how you stack up against the other people who are applying for the position or awards that you're going in for. And so a practical consideration, which you don't have to choose to do, is to deliberately and regularly check in and benchmark yourself so that you know where you stand. So how do you get started with benchmarking yourself? Well, the basic principles revolve around knowing what the norms or expected standards are for both the position or the prize or the grant that you're proposing or submitting for, and also knowing what the norms or standards are for someone at your career stage and at your level of seniority. Now, it can be a little overwhelming thinking about how to assess and benchmark yourself when there's such a huge range of types of performance and ways to evaluate performance. But one way to simplify things is literally as simple as 1, 2, and 3. And that is to split your performance across all manner of areas. So it could be your research performance, your teaching performance, your service or leadership in the academic or research community, and to categorize that into one of 3 very simple, very easy to understand categories. Now, before we get into those 3 simple categories, it's important to note that your performance will be assessed relative to a few things. First of all, if it's a specific job or role that you're applying for, your performance will be assessed in the context of what that role needs, not what other hypothetical jobs or roles would need, but what the specific requirements are of the particular position that you're going for. Your performance will also be assessed against your career stage, so your level of seniority, how many years of experience you've had, and in what areas that experience has been, and whether it's been particularly relevant to the role or opportunity you're going for. It will also, when done well, be judged relative to the opportunities that you've had, noting that the level of opportunity afforded to different people from different backgrounds varies hugely. There are also a lot of fuzzy, somewhat overlapping concepts. For example, people will talk about performance, people will talk about capability, and people will talk about things like achievements or track record. These are all somewhat different but overlapping concepts. So one might talk about performance in terms of how you're performing in terms of outputs in recent years. This might be a little bit different to your cumulative track record, which is a sum total of all of the relevant achievements that you've managed to pull off over the course of your career. And these are both different somewhat to capability or capacity for a potential new role, which focuses much more, not so much on what you've done in the past, but what you potentially could bring and learn to bring to this new opportunity or role. Whether a role or prize committee or funding body cares about your current level of performance, your capacity or capability for future performance, or your total career history of track record and achievements will vary hugely depending on the nature of the opportunity, the country that you're in, the organization that is running or offering the position or funding opportunity. And so it's important to understand which of these things are going to be prioritized when they are assessing you. So your achievement will be judged based on many things relative to discipline norms and relative to your seniority. So in one particular discipline, it might be typical for a good PhD student to have one publication at the conclusion of their PhD. In another discipline, it might be typical for a good PhD student to have a dozen publications at the end of their PhD. And so the standards will vary a lot. Another thing that will vary is based on seniority. So applying for your first postdoc, you might be assessed based on your 1 or 2 publications, and that's fine. If you're applying for a full professor role with a significant research component, you may be expected to have many hundreds of publications, with many of them being in top tier, highly prestigious venues. Any good assessment scheme will also very specifically consider your track record relative to more general opportunity. So if you have been in the privileged position of being able to devote 100% of your time to fundamental research over many years, you will be assessed differently because of the level of opportunity that you've had compared to, say, someone who's had substantial breaks for family responsibilities, who's had significant medical issues, who's had significant carer duties, or perhaps has spent some substantial time in senior leadership roles or long-term placements in industry, all of which would naturally affect their output in terms of fundamental research. Okay, let's get on to the categories of performance, and specifically the 3 categories that can help you simplify thinking about this whole process of benchmarking yourself. So category 1 is what we would call noticeable underperformance. And so this is where in some particular area of achievement, you are well below the norms expected for the position or expected for someone in your career stage. Now, you may have very legitimate reasons for why you are underperforming in that area or have not yet had the chance to get enough output in that area, but you need to know that going into the application process, this is something that will be noted because it's substantially less or worse than what someone would typically see in an application. To give some specific examples of that, if you're graduating from a PhD and you haven't published a paper yet, in many fields that would be quite noticeable. Now, you may have reasons for this, but you need to remember that someone assessing you is going to notice this. If you are a postdoc applying for an academic role and you haven't managed to land even any small grant funding, like internal grant funding in an internal university scheme, that in many roles would be noted as underperformance or noticeable underperformance. Once again, there may be plenty of legitimate reasons for that, but many assessors will notice this. And so you need to tailor your application noting that people are going to draw their own attention to this particular aspect. A third example would be for someone applying for a more senior leadership position, having never had a leadership position in the past of a group that remotely approaches the size of the group that they're applying to lead. These are all examples where the level of past track record or achievement or output or experience would be noticeably less than what someone might expect would be normal for the role. And so people are going to pay attention to it and look for reasons why that might be the case. The second category of performance or achievement or track record is what we would call unnoticeable or not noticeable performance or achievement. So that sounds like it's negative, but what it really means is that someone would look at your achievement in a certain area, say teaching or research, and they would think, hey, that's pretty typical for someone at this career stage. It's not amazingly good, it's not amazingly poor, it's typical. So we don't have any alarm bells going off in our head. Realistically, a lot of the things that you do will fall into this bracket. This is a very wide performance bracket or category, and the majority of things that people do will fall into this area. The third category of performance or achievement or track record is what we would call exceptional, noticeably better than the norm's performance. So this is where the person reading your application or your proposal for funding goes, wow, this person is really stellar in this area, or this person has achieved so much more than would be typical for someone at their career stage or for someone applying for this position. Now, most people will naturally put too many things into this outstanding performance category. Realistically though, there'll be one, perhaps two things that you do that genuinely and legitimately should fall into this category of noticeable, exemplary performance. Once you've gone through and looked at all the key areas that are relevant for the job you're going for, or the grant proposal you're putting in, or the prize nomination you're putting in, it's important to sanity check. And to sanity check where you fall into these three categories is very easy. The vast majority of things that you've done should fall into that very wide middle category of not noticeably good or not noticeably bad performance. There might be one thing in the underperforming category, and there might be one thing or two things in the overperforming category. But generally speaking, the majority should fall somewhere into that middle bracket. Most people either overestimate their capabilities or underestimate their capabilities. So, for example, a lot of early career researchers who are perhaps lacking in confidence will underestimate their capabilities. Likewise, there's a small fraction of the population who consistently overestimate their capabilities. And so it's important to check in on yourself and sanity check whether what you've done in terms of assessing your capabilities is an accurate representation that others would agree with. If you find that you are legitimately having all of your performance and track record in the overachievement category, one thing that can tell you is that perhaps the job or application you're applying for, you are massively overqualified for. Another way to sanity check how you've evaluated yourself is to ask a trusted colleague or someone who has expertise in the domain or area of the job or prize that you're applying for. And they will hopefully be able to give you frank, objective, fresh eyes perspectives on whether the categorizations you've made are sensible or whether some of them need to be adjusted. So you've categorized or benchmarked yourself using up-to-date information about your career. What can you now do with this information? Well, there's two primary things. One is you can write compelling applications for jobs or prizes that are pitched at exactly the right level of confidence and assurance about your career and your achievements, but not going too far. And the second thing you can do is identify priority areas of self-development. So areas where you would benefit most from some deliberate, perhaps formal professional development, training, and learning. Benchmarking helps you pitch your applications, your nominations for prizes, your funding proposals appropriately. You want to be confident and assured in your writing when you're writing these applications, but you don't want to stretch credibility. And so, for example, if you are making a claim that you are a prolific publisher of top-tier academic papers, but your benchmarking exercise reveals that you're very much in that middle typical bracket, you may want to reconsider whether that is the primary claim you want to make and whether that's going to damage your credibility in the rest of the application. Likewise, it can work in the other directions. If your benchmarking exercise reveals that that first author Nature paper that you published really does make you exceptional at your career stage, then you'll want to pitch that appropriately and make special note of it. Obviously, you don't want to come across as arrogant or full of yourself, but at the same time, if it's a fair portrayal of your achievements, you want to really make note of it in the application. The other critical thing that benchmarking enables is targeting professional and career development. So we talked about the 3 categories of achievement: noticeably bad achievement or track record, not noticeable, very typical achievement, and exceptional achievement. One of the important concepts to grasp is that it is often relatively easy to move your performance in one category where it is noticeably bad into the not noticeably bad typical achievement category. A typical example of this would be early in your career. If you have no publications and the norm in your area is to have at least one publication, then working on just getting that one extra publication or one first publication will make a very substantial difference and may move you out of that bottom category into the middle typical performance category. Likewise, putting extra effort into something where you're already typical in performance may not be the best prioritization of your time and resources, because unless you are able to put in an absolutely stellar level of investment of time and energy, and you have the capability to improve massively, then all you may do is slightly move around your level of performance in that middle bracket, and in most circumstances that won't make a critical transformative difference to your prospects in many of these opportunities. Where else can you get your benchmarking information to know where you stand relative to your peers who are also applying for the same opportunities? Well, hopefully you have a nice network of peers that you trust and who trust you, and you can ask them to share their CVs or resumes, to share their successful and perhaps unsuccessful grant or fellowship or prize applications, and that way you get direct, very detailed information about what it took to actually successfully land a particular job or a particular grant. Looking more widely, you can take note of people globally or in your country who were successful in getting prizes, in landing, for example, tenure-track positions, or in landing prestigious fellowships. And you can Google them. Many academics, especially in some fields, provide a lot of information about their track record and achievements. You can look up their list of publications, and so you can get some information about what the standards are from the internet. Another source of good statistical information on what norms are for benchmarks are the funding bodies that you might be applying to. So many of these funding bodies will publish or provide reports in an anonymized manner on the average statistics of the demographics who are being successful in their various grant schemes, providing interesting information like the number of years since their PhD have elapsed before they landed the funding, and so on. Universities will also often maintain their internal curated data on their own applicants and what it took for them to be successful, making note of things like the number of publications a typical academic had before they were successful, what their prior grant or funding track record was, what level of seniority they were, and how many attempts they had at the scheme. So these are all useful sources of information that are available publicly or are available upon request. There are a few important caveats when doing this process. The first of all is that you never, ever, ever know the full story of someone that you don't know personally when you Google them online. You don't know if they have a debilitating illness. You don't know if they have substantial caring responsibilities behind the scene. You don't know if they're grappling with a mental health condition which has massively impacted their output. And so it's important to know or remember that you never know the whole picture. One way of thinking about this is if someone Googled you and spent 5 minutes quickly looking up you, would they get the complete story of everything that you bring to the table, or would they get a very incomplete picture of what makes you such a great researcher or teacher or academic or worker in industry? The other important caveat when you're looking on the internet and looking at your peers to get the information you need to better benchmark yourself is to look after your mental health. It can be incredibly draining, intimidating, daunting and overwhelming looking at successful track record profile after successful track record profile of your peers. You need to remember that you're seeing a highly polished, highly curated final product on their website or on their publication profile, and that their stories have been full of doubt, have been full of rejection after rejection after rejection, and that you're not seeing that. It's important to constantly remind you of this, and also to take breaks where you need, because this can be a very draining, exhausting process. So to reiterate, you don't have to benchmark yourself against others or against the norms of your field at all. You can do your own thing. But in the competitive field that is academia and research at the moment, it is a practical thing you can do that can have a very substantial positive impact on your career prospects and your success at applying for anything, ranging from a PhD to a tenure-track job to a prestigious funding opportunity. When you are engaging in benchmarking or self-assessment, remember that that process should take place in the context of the opportunity that you're applying for, or the role or funding scheme that you're applying for, and what the expectations are for that particular opportunity. And it should also take place in the context of your career stage, so whether you are junior or senior, and the level of opportunity you've had to develop yourself and produce outputs and achievements. Finally, to keep things simple, remember that you can categorize everything you've done into 3 levels of achievement or output. Achievement that is noticeably underperforming, and once again, you may have legitimate reasons for this, but it will draw people's attention. The very wide second category of achievement that is very much normal and typical, and hence doesn't actually draw that much attention to itself. And the rare category of genuinely exemplary overachievement or stellar achievement, which is substantially noticeable. These are the 3 categories. They are obviously simplifications, but they can help keep what can be a very daunting and overwhelming process of benchmarking yourself, turn it into a much more manageable thing that is easier to do. Good luck with your applications for PhDs, postdocs, tenure-track jobs, and prestigious funding opportunities, and I wish you well.